Everyone, we're going to get started here. So we're recording the meeting as well. And so I'll go over some housekeeping stuff in a minute, but welcome everyone this evening. My name's Christy Osborn. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director for the city here, and would like to do some introductions for those folks that are here that haven't met the team that's helping the city with our major update to our comprehensive plan that we're working on. So would like to introduce Sierra Carson at the front table. Sierra works for Otak and she is the project manager for Otak. And we also have Mandy Roberts up front and she's a principal in charge at Otak. And Otak is also overseeing sub-consultants on this project. We have sub-consultants for transportation planning that we're working on, in addition to economic development and housing as well. So we have lots of smart people helping us along the way as we do our update to our comp plan for about the next year and a half. Sitting to my right is Jonathan Morales. Jonathan is going to be the project manager leading the efforts for staff at the city for updating our comp plan as well. So welcome everyone. We also have Deputy City Manager Carolyn Hope, and welcome council, planning commissioners, and comp plan advisory group members as well. I'm glad you're all here. I was given a list by our city clerk of housekeeping items, and so I always try to listen to her. So if you haven't done so already, please sign in the sign-in sheet in the back and grab your name tag if you're part of City Council Planning Commission or the CPEG group. We'll also ask that everyone speak into the microphone so everyone can hear you, and then at the end we'll open it up for additional questions at the end. So since we're recording and we want to make sure that we hear everyone, please do so as well. And then we're also going to take an opportunity, and I'd also like to welcome Councilmember Woodard, who's joining us electronically as well, and anybody else in the audience that's joining us. And we would also like to take, Ricky's here, our communications director, and she would like to take a photo to start out of the group, and I'll kind of let her organize that. So make sure there's no tacos or anything. And then she's gonna just take a few candid shots as well tonight. So I'll let Ricky kind of take over and organize us as she sees fit.
Perfect. So this is for the historical record. If you folks want to be in it, you'll have to filter in, but you don't have to. Everyone just look at the camera and keep your expression for about 30 seconds so we can try to get everyone's eyes open in one shot. So, deep breath, relax your shoulders. Make sure everybody go for your breath. If I can have the gentleman down there. Thank you. Sorry, Kyle. All right. Every face. Keep looking at me. Keep looking. Let's see how we're doing. I'm going to take a couple more real quick.
You see Woodard on the screen?
What? All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. Now I'll turn it over to our team at Otak, and they will get started with the presentation.
Thank you. Testing. Good evening, everyone. Sierra and I have divided this presentation up, and I'm first, so thanks, Sierra. As Christy said, my name is Mandy Roberts. I'm a principal planner with Otak. Our firm is located in Redmond. Well, we have offices in Everett and Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon as well. And our firm is an interdisciplinary firm. For those of you who may not know what Otak is, just to give you a little bit of a background. So we do planning, urban planning of all sorts, both long-range and current planning assignments. Then we also have architects, landscape architects, urban designers, civil engineers, structural engineers, and scientists. So it's a real blend of expertise in the firm that we draw from. And it's really helpful when we're working on a comprehensive plan like this to have that range of expertise, because we're not only on the planning side thinking about the community and the vision and the goals and policies for your community, but we're also thinking about what kind of utility improvements do you need to make to serve growth? What kinds of transportation improvements? So Otak brings some expertise, and then as Christy mentioned, we have sub-consultants that help with economic development and housing analysis. That's Leyland Consulting Group. The city has also retained Fair and Peers to prepare transportation master plan, TMP, and they will be supporting us with the transportation element of the comprehensive plan. Okay, are we good then? We're good to go? Thank you. So tonight we have some heavy-duty subjects that we want to cover with you. We're going to go through a little bit about the purpose behind comprehensive planning and how this planning effort aligns with regional and county planning and some of the regional policies that we're aligning with. And we're also going to give a recap on some of the new legislation that's been recently enacted in the last 2 years and how that relates to what we're planning for here in Mountlake Terrace. We'll take a little break and we'll focus on our plan and our process and timeline, and also cover a little bit about what the Planning Commission and City Council can expect as far as briefings, because we have that all planned out through next year. So we'll share that with you, and a little bit about the adoption process. And then we'll cover what the plan elements will include and kind of the basic structure of the plan. Sierra is going to take us through some work that we've already done on understanding your community. So we call that the community profile. So we look at socioeconomic and demographic information. So we'll be presenting that to you. We've also been doing some engagement this summer. We have an online survey. We've been having presence at certain events. And so we'll give you a summary of the summer survey results. And then we'll have lots of time for questions and discussion after that. So we'll move on to talk about the purpose of comprehensive planning. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Washington State Growth Management Act that was enacted in 1990. Incidentally, that's about when I started planning in Washington, right after that. So learned a lot about that. Basically, what the Growth Management Act is structured around is providing a consistent framework for planning that starts at the state level and then filters through regional, county, and local plans. And cities that are planning under the Growth Management Act have access to various funding programs and resources and all kinds of tools to help with their planning. Cities, counties, and ports to update their comprehensive plans. It used to be every 8 years. Now it's been changed to every 10 years, which is great. And we plan for a 20-year horizon. So we'll finish up the plan next year in 2024, and our horizon year is 2044. So we're really thinking ahead. And if you guys think back at what it was like 20 years ago here, a lot of differences, a lot of changes. So what's it going to be like 20 years from now? And we have to think of all kinds of things, like what's going to happen with our transportation network? How many people are going to be doing rideshare versus driving their own cars? There's just so many kind of visionary things that we have to think about when we're preparing plans like this. Thank you. So some of the questions that a comprehensive plan helps us to answer, really who we are as a community. If we're not quite everything we want to be as a community, what do we do to improve that? What do we need to be? Why are we planning? how does what we're doing today and tomorrow fit with what we've done in the past? What have we done to really involve the community as fully as possible? So we are your advocates as part of this planning process, and we are committed to integral community involvement all the way through the planning process. It's also required. It's a requirement as part of the Growth Management Act and the State Environmental Policy Act that we have a robust public involvement process. What's our vision? So that's something we've been working on lately. Sierra will talk about that a little bit later, but how do we want to grow? Where are we growing? What are the attributes of our community that are important to retain or enhance, that kind of thing? What are some of the improvements we need to do, and how are we going to make those improvements over time to serve our needs? So I mentioned that it's a framework through the Growth Management Act, and you can kind of think of it as a pyramid that starts at the state level, down at the bottom, and then goes through regional planning policies. And so Puget Sound Regional Council, which is the council that is a governing or guiding planning agency for the 4 counties in Puget Sound region, they have what they call multi-county planning policies, MPPs. So we review those as part of developing your plan and talk about, which of those are applicable in Mountlake Terrace. How are we consistent with those? By the way, there's no shortage of acronyms in planning, so part of this is kind of getting you used to some of those. So MPPs, and then Snohomish County has a comprehensive plan, and they have county-wide planning policies. We call those CPPs, and we also take a look at those, and we understand, which of those are applicable to Mountlake Terrace, and develop planning goals and policies that are consistent with those. Then we have your comprehensive plan, which is really meant to be a reflection of you and what's important to your community. And then from there, we go into more detailed sub-area plans, which we are working on a couple of sub-area plans integrally with the comprehensive plan. Functional plans like parks, recreation, open space plans, that's a functional plan. The transportation master plan that I mentioned is a functional plan. And then last but not least, how do we implement all these plans? And that's really through your code provisions and development regulations and projects. So that's kind of the overall way of structuring planning from state to local. And, we like to think of it as being really grassroots driven. So we're community based in how we're doing this. All right. These are just some of the goals that are the Growth Management Act goals. And a new goal was added recently around climate change and resiliency, which is goal 14 that you see there. But some of these have been around since 1990, really. Most of them have. And I won't read them all to you, but just, why are we doing this planning? Some of the reasons include protecting the environment. That's so important to us living here in the Pacific Northwest. The environment is all around us. Streams, wetlands, the ocean, Puget Sound, I should say, trees. So, how do we protect the environment? We manage our growth in a smart way so that we don't have as much sprawl that's extending out and having environmental impacts or creating a lot of traffic. We also, want to make sure that we're planning for and accommodating housing that is affordable to all income levels, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We want to make sure that we're coordinating how we plan for things like utilities and transportation, public services, and other important aspects in our communities. So those are just some of the goals. Let's just talk a little bit about PSRC. Turn it over to Sierra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. So we're going to go through a little bit more detail about what regional planning looks like in the Puget Sound region. So in addition to the GMA goals and requirements, there are also additional work that's been done in the Puget Sound region So PSRC, the Puget Sound Regional Council, which does planning for the Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Kitsap County region, does a lot of work on transportation and economic development, but they also publish a regional plan called Vision 2050, which develops policies about regional growth for the four-county region. So Vision 2050 is that multi-county MPP planning policies for the four-county region. And these are planning policies that are meant to be implemented through both countywide planning policies and also local jurisdiction comprehensive plans. Vision 2050 is an update to the older Vision 2040. As we looked for in the Puget Sound region on growth between now and 2050, we're looking at, adding a lot more people in this area, adding a lot more jobs. That 1.6 million people and 1.2 million jobs will be interdispersed throughout the whole four-county region. And we'll get into a little bit more detail what that looks like for both the county and for the city later in the presentation. There are new and revised policies as part of Vision 2050 that really put an emphasis on how we're going to address climate change, addressing equity, displacement, and housing. Again, these topics and policies are meant to be implemented through the countywide planning policies and comprehensive plans such as Mountlake Terrace. Additionally, we have some fun slides here that kind of give a sneak peek at what are those new planning topics and new planning policies that we'll be implementing as part of this plan. We'll be addressing policies on past inequities, looking at how to address the environment and climate change, policies on access to healthy environments and reducing the impacts to vulnerable populations. And as we look at growth targets and growth across the city, we'll be looking at access to opportunity, inclusive engagement, and addressing health disparities. We'll also be looking at, in terms of housing, there'll be a large emphasis on displacement risk for housing and for commercial development. We'll be looking at home ownership opportunities with a focus on historic inequities, and again, looking at the racially disparate impacts and exclusion from past planning policies. And then last but not least, we'll be looking additionally at transportation policies, ensuring that through the plan we'll have policies on mobility choices for all, and really having that racial and social equity as a core objective as part of Vision 2050, and that's something that'll be brought forth as part of the Mountlake Terrace's Vision 2044 as well. All of these policies we'll be reviewing as part of the Vision 2050 consistency tool. This will be a tool that's used by PSRC to verify that these topics have been implemented as part of the comprehensive plan. And this will be something that we go through as part of the adoption process. And I think that is the end of my slides here, and I'm going to pass it back along to Mandy here to talk about the population allocations.
Okay, thanks, Sierra. We want to give you a little bit of an overview about how population targets are allocated. In future meetings with both the Planning Commission and City Council, we're going to get into a lot more detail about that, and specifically what we're looking at for Mountlake Terrace. But this is just kind of an introductory conversation for tonight. So there are often questions about this. How are these targets derived that we need to meet? Are they fair across the region? What kind of process went into that? So there is a very methodical and logical process that happens. And it starts at the state level, and the state looks at growth trends and other factors, and they then pull together projections for the counties. Then the counties look at their cities, and they look at the cities and the urban growth areas around the cities, and they go through a process of analysis and looking at what the trends have been, what different zoning capacity is. They look at buildable lands. They do a detailed study of that. And then they make allocations per city of housing units and jobs. And so this is a little bit hard to see But just what we're showing you here is basically how the regional growth strategy results in population allocations across the 4-county region. And the Mountlake Terrace is considered to be a high-capacity transit community, which is that yellow or gold square that you see. And so allocations are also stratified by the type of city that you are. So there's metropolitan cities, core cities, high-capacity transit communities, cities and towns, and unincorporated urban areas and rural areas. So Mountlake Terrace is kind of in the middle, but we are a high-capacity community because we have a new light rail station coming, and we also have bus rapid transit connectivity. So that's important to note. Employment is also allocated in the same manner. And, I think we'll be, as I mentioned, we'll be going through this in a lot more detail and looking at what we're thinking in terms of employment, economic vitality, what opportunities there might be in Mountlake Terrace for employment. And Leland Consulting Group will attend one of our future meetings with us to kind of go through that in a lot more detail. And by the way, this presentation is available right online. So if you all want to look at these numbers in more detail, I would suggest pulling it up that way. So before we get into the state legislation, I think we just want to briefly cover some highlights of the countywide planning policies. And why do we have countywide planning policies? Well, one of the reasons is we want to make sure that Mountlake Terrace is planning in the same manner and with consistency with all your neighbors around you, and so the countywide planning policies kind of give us a framework for consistency across all the cities in Snohomish County: Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Edmonds, Linwood, where we're also working in Linwood. So they cover issues such as transportation, capital facility planning, housing and growth. And then they also confirm those growth allocations for cities and unincorporated areas in the county. So we have basically a list of numbers that the county has provided that we need to show that we have capacity for in Mountlake Terrace. We do not have to show that we're actually going to build that housing or that those jobs are actually going to occur. We just need to show that we have capacity in our zoning to meet those growth targets. And so just what is a countywide planning policy? According to the Growth Management Act, they really identify that as a written policy statement or statements that are used for establishing a countywide framework from which the county and city comprehensive plans are developed and adopted. And again, it's really to ensure that city and county comprehensive plans are consistent and that all the cities within the county are planning consistently. So this is our last subject that we're going to cover before we take a break. So we appreciate your patience as we go through, because this is a lot of detail to cover. And I'm sure that you're all aware of some of the recent state legislation that's been enacted, starting with House Bill 1220, which was enacted a couple of years ago, that requires cities to address middle housing needs through a middle housing study and looking at middle housing opportunities. So we'll be doing that as part of the comprehensive plan. Some of the other legislation, and this is by no means the full list, but some of the other pertinent legislation that we're thinking about, 1717 has new requirements for tribal participation in planning efforts. House Bill 1110, which was enacted just this year, increases middle housing requirements in areas traditionally dedicated to single-family detached housing. And so while the previous 1220 legislation recognized the importance of providing middle housing and providing housing that fits a range of incomes in your community, this particular bill looks at what can we do in single-family areas to increase more single-family type housing, whether it's duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, kind of more density at the single-family level, which also could translate into more for sale or ownership types of units versus apartments and multifamily, which are often rentals. 1337 has to do with accessory dwelling units and basically eases barriers to the construction and use of ADUs. There's another acronym for you. And then 1181 is related to the new climate change and resiliency element in the comprehensive plan. And while we are not specifically required in this cycle of the periodic update to have a climate and resiliency element, we're going to get the city ready for that because I think is it 2029? Yeah, that would be required. So we're going to get y'all ready for that by adding in some goals and policies into the environment and other elements that really will lead into the climate change and resiliency elements that we need to be thinking about. And there is some guidance coming out from the Department of Commerce, basically a model element for comprehensive plans around climate change that we'll be reviewing as well as part of pulling together this plan. So these are very detailed slides. I'm just going to hit some of the high points about 1220, which requires two types of analysis. And RCW, Revised Code of Washington, so this is right in the state code. And basically, the first provision is that cities need to show that you have sufficient land capacity to meet the housing needs of moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income households. And those are defined by a percentage of area median income. And we'll look at what that means in the next slide. The cities are also required to show that you have capacity for permanent supportive housing and emergency housing and shelters, and a certain number of those units based on, again, kind of a logical process that the county has looked at countywide and apportioned to each city based on what they think is reasonable. The second piece of the analysis requires that cities make adequate provisions for the existing and projected needs of all economic segments of the community. So not only are we talking about households, but we're also talking about different types of programs and actions needed to help achieve housing availability and fill gaps, and considering of housing locations related to employment locations. And the role of ADUs was also addressed in that legislation. So here is a chart. Again, it's a little bit hard to read sitting at the different tables, but I encourage you to go in and look at it after the meeting. This is your analysis for income bands for Mountlake Terrace, and it's basically saying these are the number of units that you need for each income band. Our team is going to evaluate where you have these units already and where you maybe have shortages of these and therefore might need to provide some additional housing types to fit those needs. So we haven't done that yet, but we are going to be doing that, and we'll be bringing that back to you in our future meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council. Let's see, the next slide is about 1110. And 1110 again is, the difference here is it's really focused on what can we do in single family zoned areas to increase the variety of different housing types or housing choices for people. And so there's some nuances to the act. I'll just read this. So Mountlake Terrace must allow at least duplexes on every residential lot, plus fourplexes within 1/4 mile of a major transit stop. You've got one of those, so we'll be looking at that. And also, if one unit is affordable at 60% AMI for rental or 80% AMI for ownership, you can have more density fourplexes as well. And then there is an alternative compliance path, which we'll be looking at. whether or not areas of the city are eligible for that. But if single-family lots have a lot of critical areas, such as steep slopes or wetlands or other features that make it difficult for those to be redeveloped with, additional units, then those could be released or exempted from eligibility for the program. And then also parking. So parking's an important thing when you're adding units in neighborhoods. People are always worried about parking. But what the act says right now, and there may be some things that are reevaluated in this act in this legislative session. We're going to be watching that very closely. But what the act says now is that parking mandates are reduced around transit. So within 1/2 mile of light rail and commuter rail, as well as bus rapid transit. So there is a helpful overview online, and it's linked in this presentation, so you can learn more about that legislation. 1337 is the ADU legislation, and it basically just says that you should allow at least 2 accessory dwelling units per single-family lot, and that impact fees for such units are capped, and it bans owner occupancy requirements, so that just means it's open to renting and other residents being in those ADUs. And then it requires compliance. Compliance with this particular bill is required 6 months after the comprehensive plan is updated. And more guidance is coming out all the time related to these legislation actions. As you can imagine, there's a lot of questions out there. A lot of people are trying to study and understand what's needed. So we're following that, tracking that really closely. I think we're going to take a break. Did we want to pause here for questions, though, or would that be good to, okay, I think that might be good, just because we've covered a lot of information, and we can try to answer your questions, and if we don't have immediate answers, we'll do some research and get back to you. But what questions do you have? Yes.
Thanks for this presentation. I do have a question about the comprehensive plan versus functional plans. It looks like there are new elements in our comprehensive plan for things like climate change and housing and various other things. Do each of those necessarily have a functional plan, or does the comprehensive plan ultimately wind up defining some of those?
That's a great question. I'll start. Maybe Sierra might want to answer as well. So the comprehensive plan is really more of a policy document. So we'll have goals and policies related to the elements, which we'll show you in a few minutes which elements those are. There is a capital facilities element, and the city has a capital improvements plan, which basically calls for, these are the projects that the city is going to be funding over the next 6 years, typically, to support growth in our community. But functional plans differ in that they get to be much more detailed around their subject matter. So, for example, Parks, Recreation, Open Space Plan will really take a look at your existing parks, recreation, open space assets, inventory those. They'll look at, what the needs are in your community. There's usually community engagement associated with that. And then they'll say, okay, here's some standards that you need to follow to serve your community in the future with parks, recreation, and open space. And by the way, here's the projects that you need to complete to meet those standards. So it's a lot more detailed look into that particular subject matter, whereas the parks, recreation, and open space element in the comprehensive plan is more of a policy document. So I don't know if you would add anything to that, Sierra, but yeah.
No, I think that was very comprehensive. I think the only thing I'd add is, other examples of functional plans would be such as like an urban forestry plan or a stormwater plan about utilities. I think those are other plans that the city has that would act as those functional plans that would be implementing policies within the comprehensive plan. And I think it would be up to, as we go through writing the comp plan policies, if there needs to be further study on, say, climate change or action, that could be a implementation item that comes out of the comp plan as something to be further studied in order to have action on those items.
We have the HB 1110, which is going to change a lot of the opportunities that homeowners have. Can people start utilizing that now, or do we need to wait for a policy change for like setbacks, the percentage of property you're allowed to cover with buildings, all those details that go along with?
You want to answer that one?
Yeah, so as of right now, zoning changes to implement HB 1110 have not yet been implemented. The deadline to implement those regulations will be June 30th of 2025. So I guess we will be working through the timeline of what that looks like. Recommendations for zoning changes will be part of the work that we do on this comp plan update. But as for the adoption of those zoning changes, that would be something that staff is managing.
And there's some great guidance coming out from, I think from Puget Sound Regional Council on just 1110 dynamics, how lots can be designed to fit different types of units, different lot sizes. So it's actually kind of nice that that guidance will be coming out, and then cities can work on adopting code provisions that can help support that. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Jonathan. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, there's guidance from the state as well. There's going to be a draft middle housing model ordinance that cities can utilize to sort of help us figure out how to best implement this through our development code, these requirements. I also wanted to add, I have a correction on the HB 1110. Since we're a population of less than 25,000, we're just required to allow for duplexes on every lot zoned for single family. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yes.
I would add also that this legislation factors into what we're doing when we're taking a look at updating the comp plan. We're also in the process of getting some grant funding reviewed currently that we're hoping to obtain. So staff is going to be actively working on implementation for some of this legislation as far as missing middle housing and accessory dwelling units. So we're complying in short order with this legislation and the update to our comprehensive plan. So as much development regulation updates that we can do in conjunction with the comprehensive plan, that's what we're intending to do as well. So that will factor into everything that we're working on in the next year and a half.
Go ahead, yes.
I'm wondering if the different documents that you're referring to, for example, the Vision 2050, are those going to be made available to us?
Yes, we are compiling a list of links for various resources. And I'm actually going to get that to Sierra tomorrow so she can get it to the city. But it will include links to PSRC Vision 2050, as well as guidance that is available at PSRC and Department of Commerce. And there's also this great resource called Municipal Research Services, MRSC. Am I saying that right? MSRC, thank you, yeah. Municipal Services Research, thank you. But there are lots of examples on that website of different resources, so we'll make sure you have links to that too. Yeah.
I'd also just like to add, everything that we're doing as part of the comp plan process, a web page specifically has been created on the city's website there's these little business cards when you walked in. Take one of these. On the back is a QR code that will link you directly to that city webpage. And so every document that we review and all the things we're talking about will be uploaded to that webpage. So you'll have access to this presentation and all of these materials as we walk through this process.
Thank you both for the presentation, and Christy, I'm very excited about those cards. Those are very, very cool. I had a couple of questions. One, a follow-up question on Jonathan's comment. I'm curious about population threshold for planning purposes. I think we're at about 24,000 right now, right? And we know that we are growing. So I guess I'm curious kind of what we're required to do, and also maybe what we would want to proactively think about doing when it comes to population and better understanding how that factors in.
Sure. So with regard to the recent legislation, that is based on current population. So the population threshold would be less than 25,000, which requires that communities allow for duplexes on every single lot within single-family zones, unless there's current development regulations that allow for higher densities, for example. When it comes to projecting population and thinking about the future, that's where a lot of the updated comprehensive plan policies we'll be working on with Otak and Leland Consulting to figure out where density should be focused within Mountlake Terrace. So town center for sure, but also looking at other sub-area neighborhoods in our community. Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess just so I understand, because I'd imagine it's a lot of work to put those regulations into place, I guess, is it as soon as we cross that population threshold, then we have to redo all of that work? Or I guess, especially kind of because we are so close to that threshold, I guess I'd just love to understand better how we are hopefully making this as easy a process as possible for both staff. And
Yeah, we wouldn't have to redo it, but when the next major update came, then we would need to do that unless the legislation changed. I think in a lot of our instances already, particular to town center and proximity to light rail, we far exceed 4 units in a lot of that. So I think we take a look at those areas that are within those distances. In some cases, it makes sense to up the densities. In other cases, we want to make sure that we're not doing as low of threshold as we can, that we're going to want to up those thresholds in some cases because we don't want property to be underdeveloped in certain areas. So I think that's part of the planning process we go through to say, where do we have sewer capacity, water capacity, streets that are adequate, all those other things. When we talk about functional plans that go with the land use plans, where does it make sense for us to put the highest densities and still meet the thresholds? And in some cases, we'll exceed those thresholds in some places where it makes sense to meet our population projection for the next 20 years. So that will be something we're walking through together.
Wonderful, thank you. And then my other question was about the climate element, and I guess would love to better understand kind of timing around that. So I think you mentioned 2029 for needing that in place. And so since that's before our next comprehensive planning process, I guess I'm curious if we're not doing a full planning of that element now, just how that would work and if it makes sense to not do that fully now, given kind of the timing around some of those things.
So some of the funkiness around these timelines comes from the fact that the comprehensive plan update is on a pre-existing cycle, on that 8-year to 10-year cycle. So the Puget Sound region is currently updating their comprehensive plans. Much of the rest of the state, their comp plans are due in 2025 and then 2026 and 2027. The climate change requirements, since they were passed into law this year, the state did not believe it made sense to require the counties planning on that 2024 cycle to be required to implement those climate change requirements. But for counties on that 25, 26, 27 cycle, will be required to implement that climate change element. One of the new pieces of the GMA as of this cycle is cities will be required to do a 5-year implementation report. And so that's kind of what that 5-year, the 2029 year comes from. I think there's still some details we worked out about what that looks like. But on the new cycle, those climate change requirements, that climate change and resiliency element, which includes changes both to that element and also to the transportation element in particular, those will be required to be implemented by the time that 5-year implementation report is done, 5 years from the adoption date.
Okay, so for us, let me just make sure I'm following. Okay, so for us, the adoption date would not be until 10 years from next year, and then we would have 5 years after that for that process?
5 years from the 2024 adoption date of this comp plan update.
Okay, which would be before our next comprehensive plan.
Yes.
Yes.
So I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, I guess if we're not doing a full element now, but it's due to be completed before we do our next comprehensive
Yeah.
planning process, are we setting ourselves
Keep
up for
it,
success?
yeah, and keep in mind, it's fairly common that in between years of those 10-year periods, cities update their comprehensive plans for various reasons. So it would be, pretty commonplace to update your comprehensive plan by 2029, 5 years from now. And then when you do that, to include the full climate change element. A couple of reasons why we're not doing it this time is, first of all, we're not required to. Second of all, there are some funding sources that are becoming available to help with that. Also, there's more guidance coming out all the time to guide us in what the state is looking for in that element. So as I mentioned, we're going to try to find a medium solution here, or a hybrid, where we do develop some goals and policies that can be integrated into a full element later. So kind of getting you guys ready for that full element step in 5 years, if that makes sense.
It does make a lot of
Okay.
sense, and appreciate the additional context around additional guidance and funding perhaps forthcoming. I think those are very good reasons for us not to fully move forward
Okay.
now. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, first, thank you, Mandy and Sierra, for letting us all audit your 200-level course on local planning. I just want to sort of follow up on the thread that Councilmember Murray's started. I think you've captured it well in terms of what I think we might expect from the state, and also think it's worth pointing out that I think we can expect more direction and more. We'll see what comes, but more accountability measures placed on local governments from state legislators. So, without crossing any sort of policymaking lines here, I think for my part, I'm really interested in seeing what we can do to meet, 2,500, 25,000 resident city thresholds, just because I suspect we'll be expected to do more. Legislators at the state are looking, as we are on city council, and we are as a community really looking at cost of housing, seeing these big sort of impactful numbers that you mentioned at the top of your slide deck. Over 1 million new neighbors are going to need homes, and we're already struggling to build affordably, to house our neighbors in need, and so on. So I just want to, there are some statements and questions buried in there, but just want to commend you for your work, and want to thank this group for coming together, and also as we're sort of doing this work over the next nearly year, think about folks who aren't here in this room. There are plenty of folks who are at work right now, or at soccer practice, or who will be living here in 20 years, trying to buy their first home. So I'll stop from going on too much farther, but really thank you for a really robust sort of way to kick this process off here. Thank you.
You ready to take a break? Any other questions? We're going to take a 10-minute break until 7:30. Does that sound good? Okay, I think.
Just like to remind anybody that didn't have a chance to grab some food, that we have plenty of food available in the Lake Ballinger room down the hall, so please don't be shy. We also have coffee and some snacks over here in the corner, so please help yourself.
Okay, so the next thing that we're going to cover is zeroing in on the Mountlake Terrace planning process for the comprehensive plan and timelines for that and what you can expect in upcoming meetings. So first of all, I think it's been obvious from the ground that we've already covered, but this process has been going on for a while. So it starts with the regional plan, PSRC Vision 2050, which we'll make sure you guys have access to that. That started back in 2017. And then the county in the early 2020 zone started working on the countywide planning policies. And then from there, also looked at buildable lands. So they really evaluate across the county what are the lands that still have capacity and development potential. And then from there is when the targets get set for each city. And different cities in Snohomish County have started their comprehensive planning processes at different times. But here we are getting ready to move forward here in 2023, and we need to have the work completed by the end of 2024. So our process then we kind of break it down simply into 4 different stages. Looks something like this, where we've initiated our work, we've collected data, we've looked at existing background documents, and we've started our engagement process. And then moving into kind of the mid to later part of this year, we've more recently been working on understanding the population, housing, and employment targets that have been assigned to Mountlake Terrace and where those could potentially be allocated. And as I mentioned, we'll bring that back to you in one of our future meetings. And then we're also starting to understand the sub-areas. So we're looking at Melody Hill and Cascade View sub-areas concurrently with this plan. And we'll be bringing that back as well to gather your input on that planning work and also just to present some of our findings from that. And then we will be developing an environmental impact analysis for the comprehensive plan. It's also an EIS. There you go, another acronym. Yeah, exactly. We should do a bingo card at one of these. That would be funny. Anyway, it's called a programmatic level of analysis that is supportive of plans. And it basically says that we're really thinking about our proposed plan and how it might affect different aspects of the environment, and we're analyzing that. So that would cover everything from traffic, transportation analysis to looking at housing affordability, and a range of other topics. So we'll be doing some SEPA scoping, it's called, in November to gather input to help inform that environmental analysis. So we'll bring you up to speed on that too as that proceeds. And then as next year progresses, we'll be working into preparing the plan, different elements of the plan. We'll be bringing those back to you to get your input on those. And then towards the end of the year, we'll be finalizing. So just to kind of look at that in a little bit more detail, we have Planning Commission briefings planned, and we have City Council briefings planned. And for the Planning Commission, we'll be coming to you next in December We'll give you an update on the SEPA scoping. We'll look at what the comprehensive plan full review process will look like for you in the coming months and throughout 2024. We'll also summarize the visioning survey and the results from that, which we're planning to carry forward through, when are we ending that? End of this month, okay, yeah. And then early next year, we'll start with an introduction to the plan, the vision for the community. All of this will be draft, by the way. Everything's draft until we get further along in the year. And then an update on the sub-area plans and getting your input on those. February, we'll cover land use and housing. March, economic vitality. April will be environment, and then parks, recreation, and open space. May will be transportation, and that is multimodal transportation. So not only motor vehicle travel, but also transit, bicycle, pedestrian, all modes of transportation. June, utilities and capital facilities. And then by July, we'll be ready to, have the whole plan compiled and start the formal review process through Planning Commission first. And then the plan goes to City Council for decision-making and adoption. So typically there's a public hearing as part of the Planning Commission review, and then goes to City Council after that. So for City Council, we're planning to come on about a quarterly basis to give briefings and updates on the plan. So it's very similar to the Planning Commission docket, except we've combined more elements together, and we'll report on those in modules throughout 2024. And the whole idea is we really want to start the formal adoption by October, maybe wrap up by early November, because we don't want to interfere with the budgeting cycle and those meetings that happen towards the end of the year. So that's the plan. Does anybody have any questions about the process or those? Sounds good? Okay, good. Yeah, oh, okay. Question, yes.
As I mentioned during city council meetings, I think we are going to need to move that timeline forward a little bit.
Okay.
For planning commission consideration a little bit earlier, so to ensure that they have enough time, and likewise for city council. So I think we need to move that timeline forward a month or two.
Okay.
For planning commission consideration, to actually be considering adoption and then getting it to city council.
When would you like when would you like city council to adopt then? What's that end date in your mind?
It's not so much the end date that I'm worried about as the beginning date for discussion.
Oh, okay, okay.
So
Gotcha.
again, that's moving the starting point
Okay,
up a month or two,
okay.
preferably two, depending on how much debate, et cetera, additional input that the planning
Okay.
commission and council wants to
Okay,
have.
I understand. We'll definitely take a look at that. I would just say one of the purposes behind those previous months of coming to the Planning Commission is to really review content all along. So when we get to that point where we have the full plan compiled, hopefully it won't be as onerous on their time and take as much time. But we'll definitely take a look at that and what we need to do. So, yeah. Okay. Okay, you bet. Okay, any other questions? Let's just talk a little bit about the plan elements. So some of these are required and some of them are optional, but these are basically patterned after what the city had in your last comprehensive plan. So they should look fairly familiar to you. So we cover the environment. That includes things such as the natural environment as well as the built environment, and kind of looking at streams and wetlands and, environmental considerations that need to be accounted for in planning. Land use, transportation, parks and recreation, economic vitality, housing, capital facilities, and utilities. So we've designed these really cool icons and hope to use those throughout the plan to just kind of help people follow along with where we are in terms of iconography and color in the plan. So we'll show you more of that in the future. just in terms of how the plan will be structured, typically there's an overall vision for the community, and then each element includes its own goals and policies. So we'll have separate goals and policies for land use, separate goals and policies for transportation, et cetera. And then if there will be action items, things that actually need to be implemented, projects, actions that need to be taken, such as code amendments that are needed, then we're typically putting those in an implementation section. So that's what we're working towards as far as organization for those. Oops. I think we covered this early enough, and it's a little bit hard to see, but this is just, again, kind of thinking about the development of the plan and all the inputs that go into that, as well as just what's the plan's relationship to other aspects in the city, such as sub-area plans, functional plans, capital facility improvements, city programs. So it just has a relationship to all of those items, whether they're coming into the plan or whether they're an outcome of the planning process. Okay, well, here are your growth allocations as a start. Am I covering this or are you? I can't remember. Okay, good, thank you. So baseline is basically where we were in 2020 and 2019 for jobs, I think is the baseline for jobs, right? And population. So the 2044 target is where we need to show we have capacity to meet that target. So basically, by 2044, about 13,000 new residents. And we did talk about this in the CPAG too, right? So about 2,700 new jobs and about 7,600 new housing units. So we have already started, we'll be analyzing where we have capacity for these, and a lot of it will be in the town center, but some of it will be through middle housing options and looking at the sub areas as well, and what capacity might be available in those areas. I was going to say something. I'm just trying to remember what it was. Okay, 2044 target. That's 20 years from now. So, again, there's a lot that's going to happen and be planned over the next 20 years, including light rail starting up, and that's going to affect the way people are traveling around the community. So we have to consider that as part of the multimodal transportation that we're analyzing for the plan. So we'll get into this in more detail and break it down geographically with you in some future meetings, but this is basically what we're working towards as far as the plan, how to serve these targets through capacity. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sierra.
Thank you. So as we move through these community profile slides, we pulled these together just as a brief overview of some of the data that we'll be getting into as part of the full community profile. So we have some fun infographics to share about what the community of Mountlake Terrace currently looks like and how it's changed over the last 10, 20, and 30 years. So for the community profile on race, ethnicity, and age, the city is still majority white, but it has increased in diversity over the last 10 years, especially in the population areas of people who recognize as more, identify as two or more races, and there is 13% of the population does identify as Hispanic or Latino. And just as a reference, all these numbers are coming from the 2021 5-year census data from the ACS, so as a reference. On age, the city has gotten considerably older over the last couple of years. This is a nationwide trend that is reflected in this community as well. There is now the population over 65 has grown considerably, and there are now less children within the city. Although, I think if I remember correctly, about 25% of households in the city do have children under the age of 18, which is pretty consistent with the countywide average. As we move forward through income and housing tenure, we have some fun, thank you. Income and housing tenure, we do have about 44% of households in the city are renting their homes. The number of renters in the city has risen considerably over the last 30 years. As we look to this graph here on the bottom, the light green bars are homeowners and the dark green blue bars are renters. And that big jump in renters is 50% of renters in the city did move between 2025 and 2015 and 2018. So we've had a big influx of renters in the last couple of years. And it is good to note, as we do look at all those housing policies and housing legislation we just looked at, 51% of renters in the city are paying more than 30% of their income towards housing and would be considered housing cost burdened. So it's something that we definitely want to look out for as part of this process. And additionally, as part of that, the city, the median household income has risen quite a bit over the last 10 years as well. While the median income of $87,000 a year is less than the countywide average, it's still quite a bit much more than it was about 10 years ago. And median assessed value of housing property has also increased quite a bit. We additionally looked at commutes. So there are quite a few people who work in Mountlake Terrace who do not live here, and a much larger people who live in Mountlake Terrace who do not work here. So as we talk through the employment targets, this is something that we'll be looking at. How do we address this, the balance of housing and jobs within the city? Additionally, as we look at commute patterns, this is all from 2021, so this is definitely pre-light rail, but it's also post-pandemic. So we have seen a large increase of households that are working from home. We still have about 2/3 of the people in this city who do commute to their daily job. And folks in Mountlake Terrace are most likely to commute down to places like Seattle for their employment. We do expect things like this to change when light rail opens, and that's something that we'll be addressing as part of the plan. And then our last slide here is on employment. Those are really small numbers and really small text on these little screens, so I do apologize for that. These slides will be available online later. But what this is showing is the difference in employment patterns in the city versus Snohomish County. So in Mountlake Terrace, the highest percentage of jobs are in finance and insurance or in healthcare. And then number 3 there is retail trade. And this is in comparison to Snohomish County, where the biggest chunk of Snohomish County jobs are going to be in manufacturing, and then also in healthcare and trade. So this is just kind of showing those differences in economy and seeing how this city is compared to sort of some of the outlying areas. And that concludes our community profile. So we're going to move on to some summer survey results. So on July 3rd of this year, we launched the City Visioning Poll. The results that we're going to look at today pull from the 182 responses that were submitted between July 3rd and August 21st. There were about 182 responses at that time. And as of today, when I checked earlier, we had 212 responses. This survey is going to run through the end of the month. We are continuing to work with the city to get the survey out to as many folks as we can. It will be sent this week to more partners and more, I think, community partners within the city. And I think Jonathan can speak a little bit more about who exactly that is going to. Folks who take the survey, we did not require anyone to answer all the questions, so we have about 71% of people completing all the questions. And then this kind of shows where we've gone so far for in-person events. This was posted on social media. We went to a youth science fair. We went to Tour de Terrace, which is a really fun event here in the city, Nash Night Out. It's also posted in the city newsletter. So one of the first questions we asked was, due response to the survey, how well does the existing vision of the city align with their vision of the city of Mountlake Terrace in 2044? And this vision statement was taken from the city council briefing last year. So it should be pretty familiar to most of you, but I can read it here just for clarity. So Mountlake Terrace is a dynamic, engaging, innovative, and a welcoming city with a vibrant town center providing jobs, services, entertainment, and activities, surrounded by safe, connected, and sustainable neighborhoods, with a variety of housing choices for all, pride in their network of parks and recreation programs that support active lifestyles, and celebrate arts, culture, and diversity. So we did have an overwhelming of respondents say that this statement does accurately or somewhat align with their vision of the future of Mountlake Terrace. And as we looked through the results, we allowed people to comment on why they said what they did. And for those who said somewhat, really the only reason they're saying that is because they're kind of bogged down with what the city looks like right now. And they were a little hard to think and imagine what the future would look like. So that's something that we'll be addressing as well. And we also asked folks to sort of rank what factors of that vision statement, mean the most to them. So really the number one thing that people said on part of the survey, the thing that ranked highest, was having safe, connected, and sustainable neighborhoods. And that was something that really resonated with the folks who took this survey. Additionally, having dynamic, engaging, and innovative and welcoming city, that again was something that ranked pretty high on almost everyone who took this survey. Network of parks, diverse housing choices. This was an interesting way to sort of see, what is resonating the most with the folks who took the survey. We also gave survey takers a map of the city and asked them with the city subareas on it, and we asked them which subarea they lived in. So we do have about a third of folks who who recognize that they live in the town center subarea, but there was less people who live in, say, in the Melody Hill subarea who took the survey. We also provided a question asking what attributes do the respondents think best contribute to the quality of life in their sub-area. It was a list of about 19 different choices, and these were the top 6 from all the respondents. So when you're thinking about quality of life, the top things were ease of walking and biking in the city, parks and recreation opportunities, proximity to daily groceries and shopping needs. And I think these really align closely with those safe, connected and neighborhoods that we saw earlier in the survey. Out of those same 19 options, we asked respondents to say what they thought the city should prioritize most as part of this comp plan update. And we also organized that data by sub-area as well, because it gave us an interesting insight in how these priorities might change across the city. So for town center, proximity to groceries and daily needs was ranked very highly. In the gateway, it was cost of housing and ease of walking and biking. For Melody Hill and Lake Ballinger, there's a little asterisk there. These are very small sample sizes. So we just want to be aware of that as we look at these results. And we've been looking at doing additional engagement in these 2 parts of the city as well. So a couple more slides here. As part of the survey, we wanted to ask respondents how we could best get in touch with them or what they would like to participate in most as part of a future engagement event. There was a lot of interest in doing future surveys. There was also a lot of interest in online engagement and virtual webinars. About a third of people said they would like to go to community events, and there was some strong interest in focus groups or a workshop. We did have about 20% of people who said that they would like to have an alternative in writing, and something that we've taken into account as we've been providing surveys in print as well. and working with staff on how to get those out. And then here was the best way for the city to communicate with you. We do have social media. The survey was posted on the city's social media, so quite a few people were able to take the survey because they saw it on social media. But electronic newsletters, the city website is definitely getting some traction. We have about 30% of people who said that they, would like to see more information on the city website as part of this project. And we also had a note for utility bill stuffing, which would be interesting as we move through this process. I think that concludes our presentation there. A little bit less heavy than the first half, but I think we can open it up for additional questions or discussions as well.
Thanks. I'm glad to see that there's a lot of work being done in advance to sort of prepare for this, because I know the timeline looks very compressed and intense. So I'm glad that we have this sort of backlog of work that you've done. I have two questions. One is a little simpler and one is a little maybe more intense. One is you have a vision statement. It sounds like it was done fairly recently, and it's about a paragraph long of a sentence. Do we, I know we were looking at individual areas of the comprehensive plan. Are we sort of looking at something that will tie it all over together as well? Like, are we revisiting things like vision statements, or, I mean, it's in a way a little bit floofy, but also like getting sort of consensus on like a vision of what we are as a city, I think, in ways that are easy and concise to say, I think helps build the case for all the other things that sort of flow downstream of that. I guess that's half a question, half a request, if we get to visit that at some point.
You want me to? I think what I'm hearing you say is it's a little bit wordy,
Yeah.
maybe, and that's completely fine. So the idea is to have a somewhat concise statement. You know, it might be how you describe your community in an elevator pitch to somebody, you know, but it's basically representing your future community and what you want it to be. And so, you know, this could be worked on, or we could even just have kind of a tagline that is accompanying the, you know, longer vision statement that's that shorter message, you know, so
Yeah.
we'd love to get your input on that as we go along.
Yeah, I saw a presentation once where Auckland, New Zealand, like had a process like this, and like they came up with like, we're going to be the most livable city in the world, and then like, you know, that would be like the statement above this one, and then this one is like sort of how you achieve that, and there's statements sort of downstream of each of these items that like then go into the plan. So if we have opportunities, like, you know, there's the trees, which are sort of the individual elements, then there's the forest, which is kind of this. So I would be interested in revisiting this, or, you know, doing a sort of a public outreach for this kind of thing. That's a basic question of what is our identity, which, you know, probably doesn't have to be its own meeting, but maybe it should. I don't know, I'm spitballing here, but, you know, it would be good to sort of align on those things as well. My second question is about your survey. I know you're looking at respondents from different areas of the city. We recently had I guess it's been a few years now, but a parks survey that they did when we were doing our parks master plan, where it was actually like statistically sampled. So they like randomized a selection and mailed it out. And when the data we got back, you know, not everyone filled out the survey, but they had information on there, which kind of gave an idea of, you know, how broadly, like how representative is the survey of like who actually lives in the city. So they had demographic information, income information, that kind of thing. And then we could sort of look back at the overall city and get an idea of like how many people we were reaching and where there were shortfalls. Are you collecting that kind of information? How do we tell how representative the survey is of like who actually lives in the city?
And yeah, I think it's a good question. You know, the intent of these online polls is to be more informal and gathering input informally from the community, and not to be a random sample, statistically valid survey, as you're speaking about for the parks plan. We are collecting demographic information, but it's optional, isn't it? Or did we decide not to do that? No. Okay. We wanted to make sure we encouraged broad participation, so we did kind of go back and forth about how much demographic information we would ask, and we decided not to ask any. I think in terms of making sure we're getting broad input across the community, we're really doing our best to get out there at the tabling events and encourage people to participate. And we are really happy with the level of participation. To have 212 responses so far is pretty good. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Sierra.
Yeah, I think, Jonathan, do you think you might be able to add a little bit of context about where the survey is going to go next over the next couple of weeks? Because we are looking to get more diverse responses as we move forward.
That's right. Yeah, so I think this week or last week, our communications manager did put another social post communicating about the survey. By early next week, we did get the surveys translated. So there's translated into 5 languages, I believe. 5 languages. So the next push is to do another social media push. And in tandem, we're also going to email it directly to our community partners and local community-based organizations and faith institutions here in the city as a way to see if we can get the word out through these broad channels. So especially with churches and our local mosque as well, seeing if they can communicate after a service about the survey or email it out to their congregation as well. So
Great. If there's a way of telling which outreach group has responded, I would be interested in seeing that data. If I don't know whether it's you ask a question on the survey or like you get the data of it's been this many responses in this language, or, there's some way of you have a marker on the survey that, oh, they got it through the mosque or something. I would be interested in more information about how effective our outreach is for this at reaching broader segments of the community.
just one more thing too on our community organizations. As you recall, as part of our public participation plan, we put together that list, and in the past couple of weeks, we've been vetting that list to contact those groups directly to see maybe there's an update to the contact, try to confirm who the correct contact would be, or even if they're no longer existing in the city and moved on to another city, for example. So that's a vetting process we've been doing over the past couple of weeks.
This may not be one, anyway, I noticed that a couple of the slides, you had a light color with white writing in it.
Okay,
Those need to be darker so that you can see the white lettering.
okay. Thank you.
Just I'll quickly want to build off of what Adam was just saying about sort of survey results and sort of understanding who's responsive and who's being reached, understanding that you've got plenty of outreach yet to come, but I think especially understanding, we saw folks who are requesting, utility bill stuffers who aren't being reached on social media. It's encouraging to see that level of interactivity on social media, but I think it really catches sort of a narrow sort of demographic, or folks who are prone to that aren't necessarily representative of the community, even if they are sort of very interactive. So whether it's glad you're covering different multiple languages, thinking about folks who are less likely to have computer or mobile phone access, or would like sort of personal connections, or even paper, hard copy options, I think is important to understand. And then also, just thinking about folks who might be living in multifamily buildings, to what extent are we reaching rental residents? So just wanted to tack on a few more things there.
Do you want to talk about the DEI meeting that you guys went to too? I'm not sure if everyone's aware of that. The DEI commission meeting that you guys presented at. Do you want to just mention that we have presented the plan at the DEI commission? Yeah.
Yes. Yes, so a couple weeks ago, we did take these slides and some additional information about how we're integrating equity into the comprehensive plan to the DEI Commission. And we did get feedback from that group as well as the CPAG Comp Plan Advisory Group last week on how to best get the survey out to diverse communities as part of the city.
Erin, or who was first?
I just have a quick question. On your timeline, under the Analyze section, you guys called out specific sub-area plans that are going to be updated as part of this process, and I'm just curious why those. I think Melody Hill was one of them, and then there was another.
Sure, I can start, and I might ask Christy to chime in. So the focus on Melody Hill and Cascade View came out of a couple of conversations with the Planning Commission about which sub-areas would we want to prioritize for this next update. Obviously, we want to tackle them all, and we will do that as part of this process, but focusing in more on Melody Hill and Cascade View is a strategic way of addressing some of those growth projections and how to manage projected population growth and housing. And then we have the town center sub-area plan, which is current. So also looking at that. And I don't know if you have anything else to add, Christy.
Yeah. That's come out of conversation of several years where a planning commission was interested in doing sub-area planning for quite some time. And due to competing interest in other projects, we failed to do the amount of sub-area planning that was wanted by the Planning Commission. So the attempt was that we're going to start basically selecting each sub-area plan as we move along to do it. And so Town Center was the first more recent update. And then the Planning Commission took a look at the remaining sub-areas and basically by vote and discussion decided that these were the next two areas. So even though we'll look at all the sub-areas, do a little bit closer look of those two sub-areas with the intent after we get done with the comp plan, we'll continue focusing on the other sub-area plans as well. So that's kind of why they got selected.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh.
I've got a question on our, you had showed us that the median income is 87,000 something. I'm thinking that we should have some more detail on that income. For example, you've got people that are working, you got people who are retired, you got people who are on disability. And it'd be nice to see how much of the population is each one of those and what their average income is.
So thinking back to the data that we pulled in order to put together these graphs, we can add more detail about the percent of households in the community that are pulling from Social Security or are pulling from a retirement income of some sort. There potentially is data, it gets a little fuzzy at this level because you're pulling from smaller sample sizes and there's privacy concerns, so sometimes they don't release the data, but sometimes they will provide what the average pull is, so the monthly pull, but we don't have data on that granular of a level. But we also can provide, like here we have, we have the median household income, but this graph is also showing the sort of breakdown across from, households making less than 25,000 to households making 200,000 or more. So this is showing sort of across the income bracket, sort of where percentages of population lie. So there's a lot more households in 2016 that are making under $100,000 than there are in 2020. One where you have sort of this shift to majority of households that are making between 75 and 150,000.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, we have a little gap in the timeline because we're supposed to have full adoption of the plan by November 2024. But you mentioned earlier that we're not going to have implemented policy until June 30th of 2025.
Okay, that is your code amendments that need to be made. So the plan will be done with the goals and policies of the plan by November 2024. And actually, the requirement is by December, but we're going to be done before that. In November is the plan. So the plan will be done, but then the city has another 6 months to June of 2025 to make code amendments specifically related to the House bills that we talked about. So does that help clarify that? Okay, great. Yeah. Erin's had her hand up, and then we'll get to you, Joe. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll be quick. I guess just a couple follow-ups given, and I know we've had lots of good conversations about engagement, and I appreciate all of the continued efforts and would love to see that final number be larger and get more perspectives from our community. So just a couple of quick thoughts. I think one, hearing that 1 in 4 of our households have minor children. The school district has a paid tool called Peachtree that goes out to all of the families. I think that's a really...
We were just talking about that today.
Okay, perfect. I think that would be a great one to utilize. I think the other thing is particularly, I know we talked a little bit about this, I think at the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission meeting, but we have really low percentages of respondents, particularly from our residents on the west side of the freeway of I-5. And I think particularly because we are looking at a sub-area plan about Melody Hill and looking at the returns from Melody Hill, figuring out, and I don't know what that solution is, but I do think figuring out how to connect with those folks. There is a lot of, I think to Councilmember Payne Donovan's point about multifamily housing, there's a lot of multifamily housing both in the Lake Ballinger and Melody Hill neighborhoods, and figuring out how to connect in with those folks and get more respondents, I think is a critical component in that being more representative and more informative as we are going through this process. So I would just love to encourage us to continue to do that work and figure out how to get those numbers a little bit more represented. So that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. Has there been any thought given to doing a more formal scientific survey or poll with a survey firm and a call center?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I thought you wanted to answer. Well, we hadn't planned to do that for the comp plan because what we were really hoping to do is have multiple polls as we go along, kind of spot polls in the process, and keeping them fairly informal and open to encourage broad participation, and then just gathering input on various topics as we go along. So, I don't know, we can talk about it, budget-wise, if that makes sense, but I'm not sure that it would, is the juice really worth the squeeze on that? I know we want to have broad participation, we want to track that, but I feel like we can probably document that in other ways and just make sure we're getting out there really broadly. So we can definitely assess that and talk about it more.
Also, on that note, about a statistically valid survey, as part of this process, we want to make sure that we're reaching the underrepresented portions of this city. If you look at this graph that's up here on the left, we have, 2/3 of the city, over 2/3 of the city that does identify as white or Caucasian. So as part of our process, we want to make sure that we're not being just statistically valid to what the breakdown of the city, community is we want to make sure that we're putting, as much effort as we can into reaching portions of the city that might not have been represented in previous efforts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of the beauty of a formal survey is you can determine how many of each of those groups you want represented, and they just keep calling until they get those numbers.
Yeah, but I think if it's a random sample survey, we can't really be as targeted. It's just random sample, right? So we just don't want to lose the opportunity to really be targeted in our engagement so we can, again, make sure we're getting input from the traditionally underrepresented portions of the community and all the folks that we've talked about here tonight, families with children and whatnot. So I'm not sure if a statistically valid random sample survey would really be that effective in giving us that much more information compared to all the other online polls and activities that we have. But I'm definitely hearing the concern about we want to make sure that we're documenting that we're getting broad input in the community. And so I think we can definitely do that through our process. Yeah.
So I had, if I remember correctly, one of the things about, those are phone calls, right? Phone call surveys? Or online. Well, online, you need to have access to online. But the phone call surveys, apparently, so few people now have landlines. And so this is what I was told. And so getting a sliver of people who have landlines and then try to have that go through, I think that the younger generation probably don't have landlines in their apartments. And also, each survey was very expensive. Yeah, it was amazingly expensive. So if we're going to do several, I don't know if we have the budget for that.
Yeah, I feel like that's what we were trying to balance when we put together the engagement plan is we can do a number of different activities and targeted activities throughout the community versus doing a random sample survey, that may not represent everyone and may not reach everyone. So that's just kind of a decision that we made when we were putting together the public participation plan. We can definitely talk about it some more with staff and see what makes sense. But I do feel like we're really trying to be inclusive and broad in how we engage the community. There's been a lot going on, but we just need to document it so all of you feel like we're doing our job, so we understand that. Yep. No other questions? That's an awkward note to end on, but.
I'll make another comment just to
help
move it along. Just getting back to Keith's point on data, while it might not answer all the questions you're looking at, the Affordable Housing Alliance has a technical term, crap ton of information and data that is going to be very useful and helpful in our process in adopting the comp plan, but just to help answer a lot of the questions you may have as far as, different people, lifestyles, et cetera, in different categories. Anyway, we'll be happy to share that information with you and let you dig through it as much as you want.
Any other comments?
All right, I think we're there. Once again, thanks everyone for showing up. We'll get all this information available to you on the website and keep you informed of what we're doing. Like Mandy and Sierra said, we've really tried to think about this process and getting continuous information to the Planning Commission as we move through the process, as well as the Comp Plan Advisory Group, in addition to City Council. So there's not a feeling of kind of getting all of this dumped on you at the last minute, that you're walking through the process and reviewing the information as we move through it. So I'm hoping that will help everyone feel like it's a more inclusive process and has more robust discussion on what we're trying to accomplish together here. So once again, thanks everyone for showing up, and we'll see everybody again. Thanks.
Are you still a teacher? Are you a teacher?
Yeah.